Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining the Product Management Mastermind, a community of over 12,000 product professionals who come together to get advice, share advice, and build relationships. Today, we're going to be talking about unleashing the power of generative AI. The format of today's discussion will start with a deep dive on the topic of unleashing the power of Gen AI, and we will follow up with some questions from our community, and then we'll wrap up with a fun rapid fire round. Before we get started, I'll do some quick intros before we introduce our guest. So, my name is Felix. I am one of the founders of the Product Management Mastermind community. I started my PM career about 5 years ago at Microsoft, and I really struggled. It wasn't until I started connecting with other PMs, sharing best practices, tips, tricks, challenges we were facing, that my career started to grow and I started to really unlock, a lot more success for myself. I wanted to help others do the same. So that's where this community came in. And it's really been a fun journey over the last 2 years, helping other PMs connect with each other, learn from each other, and grow. So with that, I'll pass it off to one of my co-founders, Akshaya, to do her intro.
Hello, I'm Akshaya, a PM at Wish. I currently work on ML solutions for the supply side of the marketplace. My background is that I'm a hardware engineer turned product manager, and similar to Felix, I've always been very interested in networking and learning more from all of my product peers, and that's where the product management mastermind came in. I've actually had a chance to learn a lot from the community and our guests that we host, and I'm very excited to be able to help others do the same through talks like this. And yeah, I'll pass it back to Felix to introduce our guest.
Awesome. So with that, our special guest today, Ayush Jain. Ayush is a senior director of product management at Microsoft, leading generative AI and customer data platform teams within the Dynamics 365 portfolio of products. Ayush has built an incredible career in the enterprise SaaS space, leading teams that launched real-time customer journey orchestration from 0 to 1 and growing the business 3x every year for the last 2 years. Ayush, we're honored to have you with us today.
GenAI is a topic that is very close to my heart. It's a technology I've had the chance to use at some of the products that I've worked on at Wish to drive some really unique user experiences. So I'm really looking forward to this chat to learn a little bit more about your experience and maybe even learn from you on how to best leverage it as a product manager. And
Cool. I'm really
so,
excited to be here. Thanks for having
yeah.
me on the call.
Awesome. And one quick fact, Ayush actually was one of my managers on my first team at Microsoft. So super excited to have him here, and kind of bring this whole journey full circle and start learning from him again, kind of from this lens. So super excited to have you. And we'll kick it off to Akshaya to start the chat. But I just wanted to share again the format. As I mentioned, there's a deep dive section, and we're going to break it up into 3 sections. So we're going to start with building for users. Some general questions about how you choose the right problems to solve, being user focused. Then we're going to go into execution. And then finally, a topic like Gen AI, we'd be remiss if we didn't at least discuss some of the risks and ethical considerations. So those are the topics. And hand it over to you, Akshay, to kick us off with building for users.
Sounds good. So first and foremost, Ayush, the first question I have is how do you identify the right problems to solve for users through generative AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the funny thing is that when we started off working on generative AI, we didn't know any better on how the technology can be leveraged. And the team basically started to think about, what are the ways in which generative AI can be applied on the existing scaffolding of the product, right? How can some of the tasks that are maybe like require a bunch of steps be done faster by just applying generative AI on them? But the team didn't think about it as a completely new way to imagine the way that customers do their jobs or the users do their jobs. And as we learned more and more, we started really rethinking about the whole purpose of generative AI is not necessarily that it somehow is different from the way that we usually do discovery as PMs. It's just a different solution or different tool to solving a problem, right? So the fundamentals and the first principles that we work with as PMs still remain quite valid in this world, right? We still always start with the jobs to be done. We start with what the pain points are, and we do look at different ways of solving them, including generative AI as one of the many different ways. And if generative AI makes sense because it significantly impacts the user's job to be done or makes it very, very easy compared to other solutions, then we adopt generative AI as the solution to that problem. And there are three things that we've observed generative AI does really well. So three problem categories, essentially, if I were to categorize those. The first one is what can we do to automate the toil, So there are things that a user does today, typically in their job to be done, that are immensely hard to get done and that require multiple steps or several hours or a lot of cost. How can we eliminate that time, eliminate that cost or complexity for the user and get it done more simply? The second one is, how can we democratize something? So there are lots of instances in B2B software, especially, where users have to work with specialists. So let's say a marketer may have to work with a data analyst to answer certain analytical questions about marketing campaigns, or a business user might have to work with an IT person to deploy something in their team's application, right? There are lots of jobs like that that require help from other users, right? And basically that means that as an individual, you are not able to accomplish it independently. So how can we use generative AI as a proxy for that dependency that you have, right? Where you may not have the skills you might need, or you might not have access to the resources that are necessary to get that job done. Can generative AI provide you those skills, really complement what you really are good at, and help you do something different? And the third thing we think about is, what are some of the things that users didn't even know they can do, but now they can? And examples of that include, for example, if like sellers might not know that there are some interesting insights about some of the customers or potential prospects that might actually have propensity to buy. And they might not be engaging with those prospects today because maybe their lead score, let's say, is not high enough because of the way that mechanical lead score is done in the past. That's a very common problem with CRM, right? So the sellers might be targeting people who may not want to buy, who may not have intended to buy. But how can we maybe show them that there are 10 new people or big customers with at least like 50 leads in each of those accounts that are visiting your website and have high intent to buy because of their actions A, B, and C, and surface that information to them so that they can say, oh, actually, you know what, I should go and talk to those customers and see if they'd be interested in buying my technology. And these are examples where customers didn't even know that they can do that unless like we have generative AI. So those three categories, just repeating quickly: automating the toil, democratizing the complex, and enabling things that, or enabling jobs that were not even possible, are really good problem categories for applying generative AI. So if you encounter these problem categories in your day to day, definitely think about generative AI as a way to solve.
Man, that's really awesome. And one of the things that we wanted to ask you about, but I think you already covered, which was, how do you ensure that it doesn't detract from the user experience? And you talked about sort of, again, that those first principles and focusing on jobs to be done and actually fitting into the workflow rather than doing something completely new. One additional angle we have on that question is sort of, how do you make that interaction feel natural? I think we've seen a lot of people kind of suggesting how to work with Gen AI, like, just kind of as an individual user. But when you're baking it into a business workflow, I feel like the potential for this unnatural interaction is kind of very ingrained there because people are very used to their tools. So what do you do to sort of kind of make that interaction feel natural and intuitive?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I think we have done a lot of mistakes here, and we've learned from those mistakes. But I can talk through maybe one of those early mistakes that we made. And so when we included natural language as a way to create, let's say, marketing segments, what we build essentially is a marketing automation product, and marketers typically create segments for their campaigns. So that's a very frequent job they do today that actually requires external support, like because the marketers need to understand the data model, even like simple audiences, like how can I define an audience that has high loyalty? Well, what does loyalty mean? How is loyalty captured in my database, in my CRM? It's not a trivial task, right? So marketers usually have needed the help of data wranglers. So it fits very well in that category of democratizing the complex. So we thought, hey, great problem solved from a generative AI perspective, right? And what we did was we basically put in initially a scaffolding next to the segmentation builder in our application, which would basically get the customer's query or user's query in natural language and then translate that query into the actual segment, right? Now it's a very common thing that you're finding with generative AI and other applications as well, right? Adding that generative AI feature as a scaffolding to the existing experience. However, that invokes multiple questions. First of all, why as a user should I go to that experience versus build it myself? When is that experience better, right? It's not very obvious. Second thing, it's not very obvious that our experience even exists because I'm required to switch into an option in the UI to find that experience, right? It may not be very obvious that it's there, and I'm used to doing things the way I'm used to it. So it's not like I'm going to suddenly like turn around one day and be like, let me explore the other options on this UI, right? So uh, it's not intuitive that it's there, and it's not intuitive when to use it, right? So it did not feel natural. And Felix, when you said, how can we make this more immersive and more natural for the user? That's exactly the problem that we created. Even though we added generative AI and checked that box, we didn't actually solve the user's problem. So what we instead did based on user feedback was to actually make it more part of their flow of work. And their flow of work is typically to create a segment by naming it and then describing it for their teammates. So if you're creating a segment today, you might have someone else who's reviewing that segment 3 months later who would want to know what was that created for. So you want to provide a very brief segment description of things like, hey, this segment captures all the customers who are loyal, right? And then you get into the actual builder experience, right? So we actually figured, hey, why don't we actually put Copilot into that box or capture the input from that box where the user is already describing what the segment is for. And instead of having them go and switch into a different UI option to find generative AI can parse that. And if they are able to, if it is able to parse it, it'll offer suggestion right off the bat, right? Before you even enter the manual building experience. If it's not able to parse it, it will just land you in the builder, and with nobody the wiser, and nobody would feel like, hey, I didn't get any response from generative AI. Well, they were not expecting it. And so we kind of like changed to that sort of a workflow, and it increased all outcomes for the feature. It increased the satisfaction rate for the whole feature because more users could now get suggestions when they were not expecting, which delighted them. It also increased outcomes in terms of the usage of that feature, of the Copilot or large language model part of that feature, because more users now fell into using it accidentally or serendipitously, as I would say. And so that's an example from which we learned that, look, first of all, like we can't just bolt on generative AI on existing experiences because we're really missing the opportunity to engage the user and solve their problem. And then secondly, we can't simply expect the user to know when to use generative AI. We have to proactively help the user, guide them into generative AI experiences when it's most natural. And with those two kind of learnings, we have now applied those learnings to everything else that we do and have found better results. So that's how I would say, we've kind of created more natural experiences for customers.
No, I was going to say that's a very, very crazy example that you shared. I found it very interesting, and the thing I think I took away from it is mainly that it has to almost feel like, as a user, I don't realize it, but I feel its effects, and that seems to be very, very important, especially if it's going into an existing workflow, or like an existing business flow that is ongoing. Thank you for sharing that. We'll switch gears to maybe execution and think through how to bring some of these products to life when it comes to doing your job as a product manager. And so, in this area, the first question I have is, with generative AI, as a product manager, you're likely going to have to work with data scientists, engineers, MLEs, backend engineers, front-end engineers, designers, and a lot of new potential stakeholders that maybe don't come with a typical product. So what are strategies that you recommend using to help bridge the gap between, like the understanding gap between all of these different stakeholders and getting them to kind of partner together and deliver successfully?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's two parts to it. First is that with generative AI, the collaboration model looks a little different than with traditional AI experiences. Because you've always in the past, when developing an AI experience, had to rely on a data scientist or a team of data scientists to create the underlying model, right? And to train that model with the right data or to fine tune that model from usage. Now, with generative AI, the situation changes because the foundational models themselves are so strong at doing some basic tasks that you don't always need data scientists in your team to get unlocked or to get started. So you could be doing like a hackathon project with maybe like one engineer and one PM and still actually deliver a solution, a full-fledged solution in just one day without ever needing to collaborate with anyone else, right? The other thing that happens with this first aspect is that your collaboration with design, which was such a critical aspect of things that we do on a daily basis as PMs, it becomes less critical to delivering like at least a V1 of an experience because generative AI provides us these patterns, right? So if you see these chat-based patterns, these patterns that basically pull in some seeded prompts, and these patterns that if you don't provide an answer in the first go, how do you hold the user's hand to like getting to the right next prompt, right? These are patterns that generative AI is giving us as universal patterns that we can find from existing applications, or like even like within a company, their portfolio of applications that they have. So it's not like the user design basically creates a new pattern from scratch. It's basically just borrowing those same pieces, and anybody can do that, right? So in a lot of ways, it has empowered even a PM to independently go and simply deliver a feature with just one engineer. But on the other hand, which is the second aspect of what I was talking about, it creates new opportunities for collaboration. And one of those opportunities are prompt engineering, right? Where PMs have never been able to play a role in actual feature development, and have always relied on data scientists or other people to actually fine tune the model after it's live. Today, that has changed, where PMs can actually collect customer feedback, both qualitatively and quantitatively from the app, and then actually act on that feedback. Because PMs uniquely understand the customer pain point and the jobs to be done. And so they can actually look at the prompts that they're submitting and try to identify why did they submit that prompt, because of the scenario, or like relative to the scenario or job to be done that they're trying to do. And then based on that knowledge, they can basically go and fine tune using adding additional prompt rules and things like that. They can fine tune the behavior of the feature, or the large language model. So that's an interesting new opportunity which can enable PMs to take more control on the outcomes that they want to drive with that feature, as well as the quality of the feature, after shipping, and do it very cheaply, where they don't have to rely on like getting engineering resources, and like maybe that planning process takes like 3 sprints, and then the fourth sprint they can fund it. So then the next thing you know is you're waiting on the engineering team for getting it done, and it's like a 2-month project. Well, the PMs can now actually do that themselves. And the way that we have empowered our PMs to do it is by creating a lightweight tool that basically does prompt engineering on any existing feature, and it also runs tests on those prompts. So it basically, for example, we'll take 50 prompts and we'll take like a ground truth of answers that should be the right answers, and it runs and reruns that model with those prompts. So if you're adding a net new prompt to that set and a response you expect from that prompt, the test suite will automatically adapt itself. And you don't need an engineer to augment the test suite to tell you that by adding this prompt rule, you will decrease the quality or increase the quality by X percentage points. And so this is the role that now PMs are playing. And quality has now shifted more right, where we now are increasing quality incrementally as we get more feedback, versus do more in the lab fine tuning for months or years, which used to be the norm back in the day. And I know that both of you have probably worked on some AI features in the past. I definitely know Felix has, and we've always struggled with the cold start problem. How do I get started? I don't have data to train this new model. I think so that problem goes away, right? So overall, the velocity of shipping something and improving something has increased significantly. So those are the two aspects that I would say, thinking about collaboration.
No, I totally agree. I actually did. I was able to help like our team with some of the prompt engineering side of things, while they more so focused on integrating with the APIs and to the external LLM that they needed to deliver a feature. So in a way, I was able to kind of sit down and do that. So I can definitely see that this is sort of where product managers can come in as part of, and also almost be a part of like the delivery process as well. But yeah, I'll pass it on to Felix for the next one.
Yeah, no, this is a great conversation. And I think we've covered a little bit of this question already. You talked about sort of improving quality over time with your sort of automated test suite. But I guess one double click on that is just, was there any sort of organizational challenge around that? I mean, I think the organization may struggle with some of the, if the initial versions aren't, very accurate or not providing the right outputs, was there any sort of like organizational education or ways you had to level set expectations when it came to like how the model would perform as you kind of improved it over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the biggest issue or the biggest roadblock is, and it still continues to exist, is the mindset and the inertia that the mindset creates. And no matter how we talk about growth mindset being a cultural attribute of any company out there, any company in tech especially, people have certain ways of doing things and certain ways of thinking about things. And so if you tell a leader today that I'm going to ship a model that has 30% accuracy rate, they would flip and they would say, wait, really? Can we not do some little more improvement here and get 50% and then ship? And next thing you know, you're spinning up a project, spending 4 more months, and it's still baking, right? That's the traditional way of doing things, and it still comes up a lot, where teams say, I don't think I can ship this, it's not ready. And it's not leaders asking that question anymore, it's the teams themselves asking that question, right? Where they are questioning their own feature and saying it's not ready to ship. And Microsoft is competing with people with companies which are incredibly well resourced. We don't have the luxury of time where we can figure something out in 2 years, because by then the battle for AI would have already been won with like leaders decided. So we are telling teams, hey, let's run fast. Where teams are saying, no, we can't because it's lower quality. So the situation has flipped to some extent. But I think, Felix, to answer your question directly, it's that mindset. And shifting that mindset from thinking about what is the quality in the lab to what is the quality in production, and then constantly improving that quality obsessively, um, that takes time. And that is the biggest organizational challenge that anybody would face, right? And also just thinking about it in the sense of how what you measure before you ship is actually not going to be true, because we are shipping probabilistic experiences. It's very different from shipping what you know is a Figma prototype, where the happy path is defined and then there's 4 other cases that are defined and you know exactly what's going to happen in every case. Generative AI is not like that. You just don't know what it's going to do in production. And the only way that you can know that is by shipping it and actually getting data back from it. And so if people can get in that mindset and measure the right things and then be comfortable in improving those things in the right ways, then I think we can have more and more innovation happening in this space. Of course, to the extent that it doesn't cause harm, it doesn't cause ethical issues, and I know that there's potentially a whole podcast that we can do on just that. uh, but that's the only thing that we really want our teams to be careful, because that's one thing you can never take back. Everything else is always a two-way door. Any ethical issue or harm that you create is it. It is what it is. So that's the organizational challenges that we've encountered in terms of the mindset changing.
No, and I totally agree with that. And on the topic of like proving value, um, and execution, a key thing here is like measuring performance and making sure that the thing that you build is up to a certain standard and meets expectations. What are some, let's say, measures you would look at to indicate success of any sort of Gen AI feature in a product, and what are also guardrails that you would keep in mind from a metrics perspective?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. Um, yeah, so you might have seen this, Akshaya, from your experience at Wish, that in the past there were typical ways of measuring success for a given feature. There was like engagement measures, there's like usage measures, and there's like some kind of satisfaction measure. I think the general framework still apply into how we measure anything that's Copilot, because again, the PM first principles still apply. The jobs to be done are still the same. Generative AI is just a different solution to those jobs to be done. But because the experiences are probabilistic, it's harder to measure success in traditional ways. And that's where the learning kind of comes in. And so over time, what we've learned is that there are three broad things that should be measured whenever we ship Copilot features. One thing is essentially the usage, which could your MAU or DAO and other kind of usage metrics, including your North Star metric, whatever it is. Because generative AI is just kind of part of your like a bigger picture, right? Like a bigger story in your product. So what is that North Star metric that is still impacting? It should always be the guardrail. And then there's the second category, which is the usage funnel. And that's where it gets really interesting for generative AI, and I'll talk about how. And the third piece is there are two things to the third piece. That's one is the satisfaction, which you can measure through some sort of in-app signals or through user feedback, but also the quality of the help that you're providing with generative AI, which is not something that we measured in the past, right? Now, I think in and of itself, the first one is pretty obvious. As PMs, we are pretty used to measuring usage and North Star metrics. The second one is interesting. The funnel is an obvious concept, but the way that it plays out in generative AI is a little different, because there's few steps in the funnel, right? One is the discovery of the feature itself. One is, the actually inputting some kind of prompt. The next one is getting a response back, and then the next one is actually using that response, because again, that's a choice that you are making. AI is not doing stuff on your behalf, it's just giving you a response. And then finally, the last step is using the response to do something with it, right? It's not simply like adding a copy that AI has created, for an email that you're going to send into your email, but actually sending that email and then observing the outcomes from that, right? And so, the way that it plays out differently is that, in the feature that we build, for example, for email creation within our marketing automation app, which is also a very high frequency activity, we observed that initially we had like very low like input rates, so that the people who were finding the feature would not input a prompt because they were not sure of what prompt to input, period, right? This is not something that marketers were used to doing. So they were just like, befuddled with that. And so when we included seeded prompts to overcome that problem, we actually observed that, this seeding actually helped overcome the first hump, and more people made it to the next stage of the funnel. Compare that to the feature that basically helps people answer analytical questions in natural language. In that case, a lot of people actually were typing in prompts because they all had questions, right? Every marketer has questions around how my campaigns are doing, and so they always have something to say. So there was a high rate of usage of the prompts, but the response rate was very poor, and that's because they were saying things like, where are my customers dropping? And when they say customers, the word customer does not map to an actual table name in the CRM. And so the large language model wouldn't actually process the right response. And so, we had to do some prompt engineering. But like the lesson from both of these is that, very different problems present themselves in the usage of large language models in different contexts. So measuring that funnel and really understanding where a user is struggling with can help you find, what is most valuable. And the final thing I would say is that usually we have always measured like usage and things like that. But in terms of generative AI, it's actually important to measure the outcome that is being attained and whether you are actually improving that outcome or not. So one example of that is that emails generated using like manual text or manually inserted text. If you compare those with emails generated using generative AI, and then compare them on output metrics like open rates and click rates, then you can actually see that features generated with generative AI, are they actually better than human generated emails? Or are they simply worse off, even though they help you become more productive and save half an hour of your time by writing the email for you? If at the end of the day their open and click rates are no better or even worse, then you should spend that time. You should go and spend 30 more minutes writing that email, right? Because it's totally worth your time. So that is the key thing to measure as well. Like, let's not just measure the usage of the feature and think about that being an end goal in itself, but actually measure the impact that using that feature would have had on the user. And that's the final thing I would add to what metrics we should measure.
Awesome. Yeah, no, this is all good stuff. I mean, I think going over that kind of classic usage, engagement, satisfaction, but with this lens is really helpful. So, now we're going to sort of shift gears into that sticky topic we know we have to cover, which is risks, ethics, and ethical considerations. Um, there are a lot of challenges now, and I think something like GenAI is still really, really new. So the regulatory environment is changing, rapidly, right? So how do product managers stay informed about, kind of AI related regulations and ensure compliance?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I feel like every day we struggle with that because forget regulatory compliance, like just keeping up with the developments in this area is probably out of reach for most people with their busy lives. But when you come to the regulatory environment, it presents a different set of challenges, which are almost akin to the tax code and the amount of like things you might have to understand. And the only thing, the advice I always give to my teams is to ensure that you're leveraging other people for that purpose. and not just counting on relying on yourself or your own knowledge of the space. um, there's always there, because it's such an early space, as you said, Felix. It is always important to have counsel of the experts, and in this case the experts could be your legal team that helps your company, or some sort of an expert in your team that could be a product manager too, but is somewhat more educated about the ethical challenges in the space than maybe you are. And make sure there's some centralization of that knowledge that you can then scale through the rest of the team, versus just relying on everybody to independently use their judgment and make decisions on ethical obligations and response, like ethical implications of releasing something. Uh, because it's not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because, as you said, it is such a nebulous space with lots of negative implications that can happen. It's almost like having driverless cars introduced 6 months ago and people actually driving them on the roads. Generative AI is essentially like that, because until like January, there was nothing. Like there were like GPT and other kinds of models, but hardly being used. And then like January, like I think ChatGPT came in and it exploded, and now it's being used by like so many people across the world. And so, there are still issues where, for example, like we have initially we released this image generation capability, and we tested with different kinds of like racial expressions and kind of like features and images, and we did observe that even AI had a bias against certain races. And that was just unfortunate, right? But because if we released that feature without doing that testing, we would have had some kind of negative dissat, not just negative dissat, but also like we would have harmed, people who belong to those races, who are seeing something that they should not be seeing from a company as big as Microsoft. So I think the responsibility is on us, not only as good citizens of the companies that we work for, but also as good citizens of this world, to ensure that we are using this technology in the right way possible and doing whatever we can to ensure that there is no harm. The only thing I don't think we can do individually is actually absorb all kinds of knowledge about the regulatory environment and become the experts in that. We have to create experts for it in our company, in our team, and then scale through them. Or even if it's a well-resourced company, then rely on legal resources and things like that, and make sure that it becomes a critical part of your shipping process for AI features. It doesn't have to block shipping, but at least somewhere in the process, you should be doing some sort of a testing and ensuring that there's no harm. So no magic bullet here, Felix. Unfortunately, I can't provide a really good tip, except for saying that it's all of our responsibility. Like it's a collective responsibility for all of us.
That's totally fair. And yeah, I was going to say in areas like this, I feel like compliance is always a little behind. But yeah, it's our job as like employees of any company to kind of make sure that we're doing the right thing for our customers. Now, along that line, next to compliance is trust. And trust is often it's very crucial when it comes to AI driven products, especially when you're introducing something such as let's say, I think the workflow optimization that you mentioned in one of your earlier examples, where someone might be used to a specific kind of job, and now that you're just saying, hey, we're going to help you out with AI, people kind of get a little worried about, hey, is this going to affect my job? Is this going to make it harder for me? Is there a learning curve? Do I even know this thing is going to work as it's supposed to work? So when it comes to things like that, how can product managers help drive trust amongst users, especially when there could be a lot of skepticism about the output of AI?
Yeah. Um, so there's different layers of driving trust. The first one is before the workflow, or before the usage of the feature. The second one is during the use of the feature, and then the third one is after that. And so if we peel that onion a little bit, the first layer basically means that like you have to welcome or invite the user into that experience with some sort of a guardrail or guidance, because AI has shifted the problem of how do I use something in the product to how do I formulate my prompt and formulate that correctly to actually get my outcome. And it's not an obvious thing, right? Like in a lot of cases, it's just not an obvious thing. Even like consumerized AI technology like DALI or some of these image generation platforms, like if you probably use that Akshaya in your development work as well, the way that you formulate the prompt has such a huge impact on the outcomes, right? And so we have to kind of welcome the user with some sort of a tip or guidance into what kind of prompts they can put in, whether it's seeded prompts that provide them that suggestion or some kind of instruction that does them more explicitly. But that is the basic responsibility I feel like we all have. The second thing is to make sure that we are very transparent with users that this is a human in the loop sort of an experience, and it's not going to do things on your behalf, because there's a lot of distrust when AI just does something without your permission or without your validating. And yes, large language models usually don't do that, but that's something you have to explicitly communicate to people. Now, during the usage, which is the second layer here, trust is created by providing a tight feedback loop, right? So no matter how well the large language model is processing what you're saying or what you're prompting it to do, it has to tell you why, or it has to tell you what to do to make it understand. So it's almost like talking to, let's say, if I'm like talking to a 2-year-old who's just started speaking, right? And they don't quite know how to articulate themselves in your language, but they're trying, right? They're trying to tell you, hey dad, like, or like, hey uncle, like whatever, I have some like big feelings, right? Like I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling sad. But they wouldn't say that, right? They would say something entirely different. And then you would be frustrated because you're like, well, I don't know what you're saying, like whatever, just go figure it out, right? uh, you don't want the interaction to be like that, even though in some ways it could be. Like you might, as a user, be that 2-year-old kid who's trying to tell AI, hey, do something, but you don't know how to articulate that need. The AI shouldn't just abandon you and basically be like, hey, you suck because you can't tell me what you need, right? It should create a feeling of trust by actually telling you why it's not understanding what you're saying and how can you say it better to make it understand, or create a feedback loop by saying, hey, actually, we were able to parse out like part of this prompt. And based on that, this is what we think you should go do. And that's also fine because at least I know that you're listening to me, you're hearing me out, and I know what part you're not hearing. So then I can use my judgment to say whether or not I should use your response, right? And then the third thing you can do is provide some sort of a way to provide feedback. And hey, like, how did I do? Did I serve your need, or do you think I should be improved? And provide a real-time way for use thumbs up, thumbs down, a very simple way, provide additional feedback as well. And those things are things that will help during the use of the feature. And then after the use of the feature, which is the third layer in the onion, AI can create trust by ensuring that it is more proactive than it is reactive. And I think most of the large language model features that you might have observed, Felix and Akshaya, are usually like, okay, use me so that I can help you, and then you're off to the races. But have you seen any feature that basically prompts you proactively and says, hey, we noticed that like your email campaigns are only getting 5% engagement. We actually think you can do better. And hey, like here's how, right? If we get from where we are today to that world in which the large language model can come back to help you after you've done something with it and close that feedback loop with you, then it starts to play a different role in your life, because that's then you not only like solving your kids problem and helping them deal with those emotions, but constantly checking in next time and ensuring that they never get into that funk. And that's what makes you a better parent. Sorry, I give all these parent analogies because I am a parent myself, and I know Felix you are, and some of our listeners here would be as well, so they would resonate with that. But essentially, like that, large language models are essentially, like in some ways, they're much more intelligent and smarter than we are, and so showing that empathy and coming back to the user is key. So those three things I would say are considerations that should be driving every feature development in large language models.
Nah, no apology needed for the parent references. They're resonating very strongly as a dad of a 3-year-old right now. So no, I get it, and that resonated with me for sure.
Thanks. Cool.
Yeah, I also love the way you broke it down in terms of like before, during, and after usage, and making sure you drive trust at all points, not just think about it at like during or after. Like really think about it at all times in like the user journey, which is very helpful to kind of even think through in any sort of experience that I'm working on, where to apply it and how to incorporate it again serendipitously within the feature. And Yeah, I had just one other question outside of some of the topics that Felix outlined at the very start. And I thought this would be very useful for our listeners who may not be as familiar with GenAI or PMs who are interested in learning a bit more about GenAI or thinking through how they can incorporate it um, in the areas that they work on, which is what sort of resources, if any, do you recommend for PMs to help get them more familiar with this domain? And I also want to be very clear. I'm asking this because it seems like a daunting area where you might need to know a lot of like data science or have like a background in it to even get started. But that doesn't necessarily always have to be the case with this. And so that's why I'm curious about this question.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I think that's a great question, and I think like PMs are always hungry to learn and grow, so it applies quite well. Um, so I would take a different approach rather than recommending a list of resources and or like things to go read and do. I would just say, hey, just go do it, right? Like go do it in a way that creates a forcing function for you. And once you have that forcing function, you will just go and find the right resources magically. It's like if you're giving out the signals, putting out the signals to the universe will come back and help you. Have you ever noticed that? It's like that with generative AI. Like no matter how many resources we provide here to our listeners today, it's unlikely that we'll find time in our busy lives to go and like bookmark them and read them. But if tomorrow I'm telling you you have to go and work on this LLM feature, you will absorb every single resource out there that's for you, and you will stumble to the right ones. So that's the one thing I would say. Either you do it in a safe hackathon sort of a way within your team, which is not doing generative AI things, but hey, like let's try something different, or you do it as in within the context of something that you're already doing, or you do it with your community where you can get together on LinkedIn, maybe organize an informal hackathon. Hey friends, let's get together like as part of the PM mastermind community and let's do a quick hackathon. Whatever way you choose to create that forcing function for yourself, just go do that. And the sooner you do that right now, the more you will be equipped for the future of generative AI. That's my 2 cents.
Love it. That is like always some of the best advice you can give anyone interested in anything product related. It's like go build something, right? Go build something and you will learn the fastest. So I love that answer. Maybe we should think about a PM mastermind hackathon. That sounds actually kind of fun. Maybe we need to find like an engineering community and to like partner with. But we've learned in this chat that PMs can actually do a lot on their own. So we'll see. We'll see. This is interesting.
Maybe we partner with ChatGPT.
Right, right. Okay. No, that's a good idea. We'll have to think about that. All right. So you've dropped so many gems. I cannot wait for our listeners to hear this episode. But before we let you go, we've got our fun rapid fire round that we do with all of our guests. So you ready?
Yeah, absolutely. Bring it
All
on.
right. So first one, read versus watch.
Read.
Okay. What's the last read that you would recommend that you recall?
Yeah, the last good one was Switch by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And that's just because I'm more on the product leadership side, where influencing people and changing behavior drives more results than being a really good PM. Um, and so, if you're in that zone, or if you want to get in that zone as well, I think that's a really good book for you to kind of think about different examples and think about more human psychology, less product, less objective things, and think about organizationally changing that, but also from a product perspective, how to apply that human psychology and get better outcomes for what you're building in the product too.
Love it. Beach versus mountains.
It depends on the time of the year. Beach in December, mountains in the summer. But yeah, if I have to pick one thing, I would pick mountains. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and it's amazing to be able to experience the mountains here.
Nice. Okay. So is there a particular hike that you would recommend out there for folks if they're visiting?
Yes, I would definitely recommend if people get to go to Mount Rainier National Park someday here, they try out the Fremont Lookout hike, where you experience cloud inversion. So the clouds are basically below you, and it's a fire lookout, so you have a 360 view of the complete mountain range.
That sounds awesome. All right. So this one, it's going to be interesting for you because you do it in your day job. But when's the last time you used generative AI tech in your personal life? And what was it for?
Yeah, pretty much on Friday when we had to write a document on a strategic bet that we are taking, and basically I could use generative AI to get it to articulate the way that customers get a certain job done, and like tell me like step by step where the pain is and how much time it takes to get each of those steps done. And so I was able to like reduce the time I would have taken to write that doc from like at least a couple of hours to a few minutes. It was just content I could lift and shift, and then I used summarize as well for that doc, and then my doc was ready in like half an hour or something like that, some crazy time. So yeah, uh, definitely been using it quite frequently.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Last one. Favorite product right now and why?
Favorite product and why? There's so many and so hard to pick from it. But I think I really like Apple Fitness Plus, which I started using very recently after using a slew of other fitness applications. But the thing I really like about it the most is the integrated experience it provides, um, and the human psychology it really uses to basically get not only usage but also just benefit me in my day-to-day life. An example of that is just simply that it integrates really well with the Apple Watch and the rings that you have. And so if you're not closing your rings, like, okay, how can you close your rings today? Well, take like a 10-minute workout, and they have, bang, a 10-minute workout that's waiting for you. And when you complete it, as you're completing it, you're seeing the rings progress in real time. They also do this interesting psychological thing where they put you either ahead of the pack or in the middle of the pack or you're behind the pack. So there's a little bit of a motivation that get thrown in there. And then the workout itself is usually very energizing, very engaging, and then you get to see instant results. So if you really think about the have you if you've read if listeners here have read the book Hooked by Nir Ayal, he talks about the hook action, um, trigger and reward sort of a framework to think about product development. Like what is the hook which motivates people to come to your product? What action do they take? What is the reward that they get by taking that action? If you can complete that loop, then it creates habit forming products. And so that's exactly the loop I talked about. I have rings I haven't closed, so I'm really motivated. That's my hook. It prompts me at the same time to take a workout, so I act on it. I take the workout. Immediately after the workout, I get my rings closed. I get rewarded, and I walk away with a sense of accomplishment. And so it creates a really self-reinforcing cycle for me to come back every time.
Awesome. Yeah. Gotta love Apple Fitness. That's great. All right. Well, it's time for our wrap up. Again, this was a phenomenal conversation. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of time, share any final thoughts with our listeners and let them know where they can find you or how they can connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the final thought I would give is like, as you think about generative AI, don't think about as a bolt-on to existing experiences in the product. And I talk about this principle of desired lines, which basically is like think about an architect that created a building or that basically like made a building, but did not define how the paths would lead into the building or out of the building. So the building was completely constructed without like any kind of sidewalks or pathways in and out, even without like proper doors, so that they could observe in real time how like people entering and leaving the building would would engage with it. And once they know those paths have been created in the grass, they can actually lay the paving stones or like create doors, right? But when we build products, it's very seldom like that, right? We always build products from an opinionated standpoint. Hey, here's our information architecture, here's our navigation menu, and if you have to do this job, you have to first go here, then go here, then go here, then click here, and then you'll get that job done, right? So it's exactly opposite to the principle of desired lines. But generative AI gives us an opportunity for the first time to get rid of that information architecture overload and the fixed navigation structure every product has today, but simply ask the user, what is it that you want to get done? And the user can simply say, this is what I want to get done. And the generative AI, kind of walks them through the right way of getting it done without throwing them in the depths of your product and having them, thrash around with your navigation structure. And really think about that as the opportunity to reimagine your complete product and the experiences you're building. That is the one key thing I would want every listener to walk away with and think aspirationally. As to where to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's a pretty simple alias, linkedin.com/in/Ayushman Jain. And I'm also speaking at a bunch of conferences. I'm going to Product Led in San Francisco on September 18th, talking about generative AI with a Google PM leader. And so that's the first time a Microsoft Google collaboration is happening on generative AI. So hopefully some of you will be there. And there's a bunch of other conferences as well that I'll be speaking in. I'll be posting about those on LinkedIn. And if nothing else, you can always find me through Akshay and Felix. I'm sure they know how to reach me.
For sure, for sure. Awesome. Well, again, Ayush, thank you so much, man. This has been an incredible conversation. Again, I'm so excited for folks to hear this one. And for everyone out there, thanks again for joining another episode with the Product Management Mastermind, a community for PMs to get advice, share advice, and build relationships. We'll see you next time.